Okay, we're the last talk now. Sometimes I say this, but then there's always another talk happens afterwards. You can't plan the future that easily. So, but anyhow, this is like the last major talk scheduled towards the end of the retreat. So it seems to be a lovely thing to talk about. That mentioned insights yesterday. Not going to all of those insights, but some of them, and also just where those insights actually lead, what the insights are there for. Is it just so you can be a wise guy and just win all the arguments on the coffee tables? That's actually not why we're Buddhist monks or Buddhist nuns. It's not why we practice. The idea of practice is to lead liberation from suffering. In other words, to become fully enlightened, so that suffering doesn't affect you anymore. Is that the case? I'm going to ask you a question now. If one is perfectly enlightened, do you suffer? Oh, you've heard me too many times before. You guys are too smart. That's one of the questions I often ask, to see if a person's really understood what the Buddha taught. Does an arahat, fully enlightened being, suffer?
Yes.
And the answer is yes. And and this is, I often quote this bhikkhuni, if I remember her name correctly, Wajira, that she was approached by this fellow called Amara, and just saying that what's she doing sitting there? And she was actually saying, there's not a person sitting here, it's just these 5 components of existence, nothing else. And he said, what does it feel like? And she said, all she experienced is suffering arising, suffering being, and suffering ceasing. That's all. And that's the description of an enlightened being. When will that suffering eventually cease? Parinibbana, when her 5 components of existence, or 5 khandhas, eventually stop and fade away. But what is enlightenment then? If you're fully enlightened and you still have to suffer, obviously much less than if you're not fully enlightened. What actually is the suffering? Why? And one of the best descriptions I ever heard was in what the Buddha called the Aggiwacca Sutta. And there, the Buddha was describing, suppose you see a candle flame. And that, he actually said oil lamp, but you can understand candle flame much better. Suppose you see a candle flame burning. Then what happens when that candle flame expires? Either, why does it expire? Either the wax is all used up, or the wind blows the heat away, or the wick is all used up. Any one of those 3 causes, then the flame has expired. But where does the flame go once it's expired? If it's been a very good flame, and it's made lots and lots of cups of tea for a monk like Ajahn Brahm, or it's lit the way for people so you don't lose the right track to walk on, or if it's warmed you in the cold weather. However, I can't see any cold weather here in Malaysia. Even now, sometimes, please excuse me, when I see you wearing a hat on, I thought, how on earth can you bear that? It's boiling. Different people have different sort of health requirements. That's one of the reasons why, if I had control of the aircon, you'd all be freezing, and I'd be really comfortable. But anyway, different people. So anyway, what happens to that flame if it keeps you nice and warm and comfortable? Does that flame go to the heaven realm where all flames live happily ever after, or if they're bad flames and they burn you, and then do those flames go to some hell realm where the bad flames have to burn in agony forever? And of course that doesn't make any sense, does it? What is a flame? The flame is just a combination of three causes: the heat, the wick, and the fuel. When any one of those three things vanishes or is used up, what happens to the flame? It doesn't go anywhere. It's used up. It's finished. And in the Pali, the word they use is it nibbanas. They say the flame nibbuta. That's why we have some of the chanting which we do. Okay, we're saying that the chanting has some kind of power to bless people, to take away sicknesses and stuff and give you good luck. But the main reason for the chanting is that's how we remember the Buddha's teachings. And one of those teachings is a common chant we do in the Ratana Sutta. And the last verses of that is Kinam Puranam Nawang Nati Sambhava. The past is destroyed, there's no future becoming. Kina Jati Nati Dan. Well, I have to start from the beginning again. Minang Jati Yatayang, he said Yatayang Upadipa. I think I had too much breakfast this morning. Kinang Puranam Nawang Nati Sambhava Virata Chitta Ike Bhavasmi. The chitta is free from becoming again. Kina Jati Yatayang Padipo. The birth is destroyed, just like the flame in a candle. Natidana Purana Nami Nati Sambhavan Virata Chitta Bhavai Bhatasmi. Kina Jati Yatayang Padipo. They use the word Nibbuta, that birth, Jati, Nibbuta, Yatayang Padipo. The birth has been destroyed, just like the flame on this candle or oil lamp. They use the same word, and that kind of struck me. Sorry, I should have had a look at it before I came in here. But you can look at it, it does say that. They use the word Nibbuta, which is the past participle of Nibbana. That basically means it's Nibbanad, just like the flame of this candle, when one of those three causes is snuffed out. And they use the same word, so even kids in the time of the Buddha would understand what the word Nibbana meant. They would tell their mum, Mummy, the oil lamp is Nibbanad, it's gone out. And they would understand it doesn't go anywhere. It's the three causes which brought it into existence and now been snuffed out. It's Nibbanad. And so that now, because Nibbana is such an important word in Buddhist philosophy and metaphysics, people have so many different translations for it. But I like to go back to how the Buddha taught, and this is actually how he expressed it to be. Just like the going out of a flame of an oil lamp. And I did mention that one of my favourite bhikkhunis from the very beginning was this lady called Patachara. And Patachara was a woman who went mad because she lost her two children, her husband and her two parents on the same day. And if you lost someone very dear to you, can you imagine what that would do if you lost 5 people, basically everyone in your close family? And so she wandered into the Jetavana monastery when the Buddha was giving a talk there. And all the other monks, they tried to get out of here, you're naked, you're a young lady, you shouldn't come in here. But the Buddha stopped them, and one of the monks gave her a spare robe she can put around herself to keep her modesty. And the Buddha started teaching her. She soon became ordained first of all as a samaneri, then as a bhikkhuni, and soon she became one of the best teachers ever. And I remember the story of how she became fully enlightened. She'd obviously been doing a lot of meditation. She learned how to let go. She had to, because holding on to her grief would be too painful. Then one day she was just meditating on a candle flame. This is in the Therigatha, the verses of the enlightened beings. In this case, Theri means the enlightened bhikkhunis. And the wind blew the flame out. And that was just the spark of insight needed for her to get through to full enlightenment. She saw the simile, the flame which was like her mind, supported by many things. But when one or two of those crucial elements are used up, are exhausted, then the mind is exhausted too. It doesn't continue on. It really is anicca, not rise and fall. The subject of causes, and when those causes are used up, the effect also is used up and vanishes and disappears. So that's how the Buddha described Nibbana, things ceasing. So that becomes the reason why that we teach meditation, why we keep precepts, why we talk about Buddhism. And sometimes I get a bit upset, not upset, but disappointed that as monks, as teachers, we teach these ideas to other monks and bhikkhunis. We don't teach that to lay people. As if we think that, you're not up to getting fully enlightened. But it happens. You read the suttas, you read the stories, and sometimes someone is given a talk and something happens and they get fully enlightened. Lay people. So I think it's really selling Buddhism short not to teach as much as I possibly can for you. Even if you don't get enlightened, at least you get the seeds planted inside of you. Because many of those seeds were planted by Ajahn to me when I never ever understood until many years later. One of those, for example, I think I may have mentioned it earlier, but here it comes again, when Ajahn described his monastery as a mango orchard. And he said that those mangoes had been planted by the Lord Buddha. And I thought, oh, come on. The Lord Buddha lived 2,600 years ago. He never visited Thailand. Although you know that sometimes that people like to elaborate and exaggerate and say that Buddha visited even Malaysia. About a year ago when I was in Sri Lanka giving a big talk at the BMICH, that's a big convention centre, about 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people were there. And the monk was receiving the questions, translating them to English, and asked me to answer them. And one of the questions was, he said, there's a few monks here in Sri Lanka who were saying that the Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, actually not just visited Sri Lanka, but the Buddha was actually born in Sri Lanka. Ajahn Brahm, what is your opinion on that? Have you heard that claim? He said the Buddha was actually born in Sri Lanka 2,600 years ago or something. And I replied immediately, my character. I said, well, everybody knows that the Buddha was born in Australia. And that was a very effective answer, because everybody, just like you, burst out laughing. And so did the monk, Venerable Damita. He's a very good Sri Lankan monk. And he burst out laughing. And just it took them a while to translate, but most people understood the answer. They understood enough English. And then I explained afterwards, a silly question deserves a silly answer. And no one in their right mind would ever think that the Buddha was born in Australia. Anyone who's got their right mind, the information, they would never say that the Buddha was born in Sri Lanka either. So it was an answer which made the point that obviously that can't happen, it's not right. But nevertheless, people like to think like that. And so sometimes on these little places where we have the opportunity to teach, we teach in such a way which doesn't leave any doubt in people's mind of, what the Buddha was, where he lived. So when Ajahn started saying the Buddha actually planted mango trees in Wat Ba Plong in northeast Thailand, I said, come on. So I'm not an idiot. And he kept on saying this. I rejected it at the time, but I had to listen. And then he said that 2,500 years or 2,600 years later on, those mango trees are all ripe. And there's thousands of juicy, ripe mangoes on those trees. Yeah, where are you going with this rubbish? Please, if ever you hear any teacher you respect say things and you don't understand it, it's quite fine to reject it. But then, just it stays, if it's a real teaching, it will stay in your mind, like it stayed in my mind for about 7 or 8 years before, something happened and you saw how incredibly powerful that teaching was. He said, these days, you monks, you don't have to climb the tree to get the mango. You don't have to get a ladder to get that mango. You don't have to throw sticks up at the mangoes to get them to fall. Since all the monks have to do now, thanks to the compassion of the Buddha, is to sit perfectly still and hold out your hand, and a mango will fall right into your hand. And to me, that was just confirming this was madness and crazy. If I sat under a mango tree, a real mango tree, and there were mangoes on it, I'd have to wait for hours for a mango to fall. And if it did fall, it would probably fall on my head rather than my hand. And ow! But then later on, you kept on meditating. You get more and more understanding, more and more experience, more glimpses, into the truth. And little by little, you see what a beautiful simile that was. The problem is that this, all these great insights are all out there. They're ready for you. Even things like the deep meditations, like the jhanas. You've heard how they're done. People get them these days. Sometimes they get them almost, I say, fluking them. They happen. Why not you? A lot of time is because you want them. You're not sitting still. You're trying to force them. So here, the Buddha was saying, you sit perfectly still. Hold out your hand. Means, you have that kindness, opening the door of your heart and see what happens. You don't expect, you don't want. You just see. You have this courageous sense of exploring. That's sometimes why, instead of using the word contemplating to actually encourage insight, I prefer the word exploring. Seeing things you've never seen before. Going to places you've never experienced before. And just seeing what happens. But certainly not to use thinking. Because the way of thinking, you're kind of confined, restricted by all those ideas you've heard and learned from others. And all thinking does is imitate. It never goes deeper. So after a while, one stops thinking and just allows the mind to stay with something and explore it and go deeper into it. I always find that's the most interesting thing ever to do. When I was talking to the World Computer Conference over in Dijon a few years ago, that's how I explain things. You take anything, don't ever believe that you've understood it. If you give it names, it's like you've understood it. That's like in ancient, Psychic Research Society, there's all sorts of other stuff. Please excuse me, I never got into this, so don't feel afraid. Like witchcraft. You give something a name, and then you can have power over it. If you don't give it a name, you've got no power at all. It's free. It's liberated. So I never like the ideas of, okay, this is my wisdom, give it a name. You've confined it. So instead you just allow that word, say wisdom, to stay in your mind and just see what opens up once you say those words. One of those lovely words which I use to meditate, peace. What is peace? It's a kind of, it's not just a word which you can define and put that definition in a dictionary. It's way, way, way deeper than that. So sometimes if ever you want to explore and have some fun in some insight meditation, just say that word peace. Don't say it again very quickly. Let it sort of do its job of pointing your mind in the direction of what peace is. Say it again, peace. And every time your mind goes in the direction of what that word is pointing to. And after a while it goes deeper than you've ever been before. You understand, not by another few words, what it means. You understand what peace is by feeling it, by experiencing it, by knowing it not as a definition in a book, but as something which has real, powerful meaning to you. And it's not just the word itself, but just know what it does for you, and how it feels, how beautiful it feels. And so after a while, every meditator, I would say, has to be a little rebellious, to take a few words which really resonate with you and just follow it to its end and become an expert of what peace is, not because you can explain it to others, because it's right in front of your mind and the mind can play with it and get to know it so deeply. So this is actually how that insight arises. And you have to be very careful with the development of insight which gets close to enlightenment, because so many people want to be enlightened, especially if you've been a monk for a few years, and then your friends come and say to you, oh, you've been on retreat for a couple of years, you spent 6 months in solitude and silence, what did you get? And you say, oh, nothing. Oh, we had to work so hard to take your duties on when you were on retreat. That's really unfair. We never let you go on retreat ever again. So there's always a kind of almost unwritten force. You know, you're a monk. I've been a monk for over 50 years now. Ajahn Brahm. Have you just been wasting your time? What have you got? What have you achieved? What have you seen? What have you known? There's always not the encouragement, almost the force, the peer pressure, to actually to see deep, to find out what's happening deep inside your mind, to understand what enlightenment is. And because of that, sometimes some monks exaggerate. So anyhow, I thought today, to make it interesting, I'm going to describe to you, please don't laugh, those of you who heard this story before, of when I became enlightened. Would you like to hear that?
Yes.
Really, if you want it, it's bad for you, so I won't say it. But no, it's a good moral to this story. This was only my fourth range retreat. I had lovely meditation from the very beginning. I was fortunate by having good teachers before I became a monk. And so this range retreat had nothing to do, just to meditate. And the head monk, now he wasn't much of a teacher, but you had all the teachings from Ajahn, from others. It was a very wonderful situation in the northeast of Thailand, in a remote monastery, nothing much to do. And after a while, when there's nothing much to do, the food wasn't great, but it was good enough. It was very simple. Day after day was pretty much the same, except for on the moon days we would meditate all night. There's one of those moon nights when you really get into some meditation and keep on going. I was young and not tired, and when I started meditating, there was one evening, actually this was not the night we meditated all night, I'm sorry, this was an ordinary night. But, if you missed out some sleep, you can always catch up on sleep later on during the day. But this particular night, my meditation was really hot. I don't mean like warm, I mean it was really easy to really start getting into it. And this is where I really appreciated, doing some of the walking meditation. Please never think that walking meditation is a second-class meditation and you have to do the sitting meditation to go very deep. This evening when I was doing walking meditation, very sort of still, very quiet, but you didn't have any aches or pains in the body, so you could meditate for long periods, just walking forward and then turning around and walking back. And I had some amazing results from doing walking meditation. One thing I always knew, that through walking meditation you weren't getting anywhere. You go there, turn around and come back again, and turn around and go back again. It had this wonderful part to it. You weren't doing this to get somewhere. You are learning how to be just where you are and understand what being right now truly is. So anyway, doing the walking meditation properly, just step after step after step, your mind got more and more clear. The sense of stillness got stronger and stronger and stronger. And as it does become stronger, all these solutions and answers, all these insights, they come. And they come even if you're not looking for them. They just start flooding in. Like all these ways of looking at life which you've never seen before started coming. And they came more and more. And because of the interest and the joy of finding all these solutions, they're just flooding into you. You don't go searching for them, they just come. And then eventually the big one came. The big insight. Oh my goodness. When that came, like tears come down your face. This was the middle of the night, maybe 1 a.m. The only people who could see this was the mosquitoes. And you were blissed out. If you want to know what bliss is, get these deep meditations or deep insights. And it's fantastic. And so I carried on walking, then I went to do more sitting meditation in the simple hall. And it got to about 2 a.m. The bell usually goes at 3 o'clock. So I thought, might as well just go and have a stretch, lay on my back. No way I could go to sleep. So I stretched, and then after 15 minutes, let's go and do some sitting meditation in the hall. This was about half an hour before the bell was rung. So I was there in the hall, sitting perfectly straight. No sloth and torpor at all. Perfect peace. And then I heard the bell ring. And then all the other monks staggered in. And I was just there. I was the number 2 monk at the time. And so I was sitting there before anybody else. And then we sat. And after about half an hour, about 3:30 or 4 o'clock, I can't remember when, we do the morning chanting. Just like you heard here, but we do it translated into Thai. And it's usually, please excuse me, quite boring. And I never liked the morning chanting. But that morning, the first morning after that experience, Yo so! I couldn't help it. You had so much energy. You were shouting it out. And they sing him out and crying down. I couldn't stop. If ever this was like 3, 4:30 in the morning, hadn't had any sleep. When these things happen, you get so much energy, pure energy. And it's almost you have joy as well. You can't help but say, Namo Tassa. Oh my goodness, what are you saying Namo Tassa to? This is incredible. You really appreciate the Buddha. Full on. Whoa. And so after finishing that chanting, then we do some more meditation. Oh, it's so blissful, so easy. And then after the chanting, to clean up, ready for the arms round. And imagine an enlightened being going for arms round. You'd only get sticky rice, that's all. It's a poor village. And as you walk there, usually the women, sometimes kids, will give you the rice in the bowl. Zap! I accept every one of those. You don't realize how fortunate you are today. Giving food to a newly enlightened mind. Zap! And I'm describing it pretty accurately. There's one thing I haven't described accurately yet, but you'll find this out in a few minutes. And then when I came back into the monastery, usually every day the food was always the same. You'd have the rice and alms round, and then you also have the pot of stinky fish curry, plard egg, rotten fish. And this was, I mentioned, I think, to some of you earlier, when I was cleaning around the kitchen at another monastery, and I found one of these earthenware containers, only a small thing, and then the bit of plastic covering the top had been punctured, and flies had got in, and the rotten fish were crawling with maggots. I went to throw it away, and the most refined man in the village, the head man of the village, what are you doing? Look, it's got spoiled, it's crawling with maggots. He said, that's extra protein. He refused to throw it away, and that's what we ate tomorrow morning. And that was the usual food we ate, rotten fish curry with the rice. But this morning, the morning of my enlightenment, there was another pot of curry there. Please, I apologize, I used to be a vegetarian before I was a monk. But this time, the second pot of curry was like a pork curry. It was kind of edible. Rotten fish, you could eat it, but it wasn't very nice. This one was kind of tasty. You know what I thought? Ah, yes. Heavenly beings have recognized there's a new enlightened being in this monastery, and they've come to celebrate. Celebrate. I honestly thought that. So I sat down there, we did all of the chanting, the blessings. And then because there was only about 6 monks in that monastery, the abbot, the head monk, who was a local, he was born in that village. So he had his sticky rice, he took his choice of the 2 curries first of all. And I couldn't believe it, even though the rotten fish curry was what he was used to. He took whopping ladles of the pork curry, more than anybody could eat. But I didn't mind, there was still some pork curry left. But then what he did was absolutely unforgivable. He took the remainder of the pork curry and he poured it in to the rotten fish curry, stirred it up, and said it's all the same. It's all the same. You know what I thought? If it's all the same, why did you take yours first before mixing it all together? And he passed it to me. And I thought, he's a hypocrite. That's a head monk. And I was so angry. And that's when it hit me. Enlightened beings do not get angry. That was one of the most depressing experiences of my life as a monk. To think you're enlightened and zapping all the lay people, and thanking all the heavenly beings for giving us something to celebrate, and then realizing I wasn't after all. So I swallowed anything in my bowl, I didn't care. I was so depressed. It's one of the most depressing experiences of your life as a meditator. If you think you're enlightened and finally you're not. But it was interesting, it taught me a lesson that whenever you see anything which you believe to be the truth, first of all you know this is powerful, but you don't know if it really is the truth yet. Any insights which you have to wait. In one of my books, I remember describing it like you have all these obstacles in your life, all these defilements. And sometimes the meditation, or what you hear as an insight in the talk, or what you see for yourself, is so powerful. It's like an explosion goes off in your mind. Nothing painful, but just old ways of looking at things. Old delusions get blown to smithereens. But then there's so much dust and smoke happens afterwards. Sometimes you have to wait for years until that smoke all settles and you find out, what defilements are left. What sense of self and identity you have left. Who you think you are. Just imagine, you can see that this person you identify with, the man, the woman, old, young, monk, lay people, smart, stupid, all of that gets destroyed. And you don't ever look like that anymore. Somebody asks you who you are. I don't know. Many years ago, no, not that many years ago, about 3 or 4 years ago, I found out that someone my age in Australia can qualify for a Commonwealth Seniors Healthcare Card to get free doctor's appointments, cheap medicine if you need it. And so somebody told me that why don't you apply for one? It was totally free. Just looking after senior citizens. You just had to be over 60. I think when I applied for this, I was over 70. Why not? So I got on the computer and logged in. And then when I made the application, they said, well, yes, you qualify, but you have to come in to one of the health care card offices, they call it centre care, to actually prove this is not an identity fraud. You are the person you say you are. So I made the appointment, went in at that particular time, and this woman was supposed to interview me. So she sat down opposite me and said, can you prove who you are? And I was serious. I said, I've been a monk for over 40 years. All that time I've been trying to find out who I am. I haven't found out yet. People who work for the government don't have senses of humour. She scowled at me. This is not a joke. I have to know this identity fraud. Who would want to steal my identity? Does anyone want it? You know, we have all these auctions later on. I can auction my identity. You want to be Ajahn Brahm and just go over and work your butt off talking and speaking and giving blessings and stuff. Would you like to do that? Yeah, who would like to steal Ajahn Brahm identity? You have to be really crazy to do that. But if you want to, I'll give it to you for free. I always say that when I was a kid, the scariest thing which could happen in a movie is like some devil would come up to you and say, I've come to take over your soul. If any devil came up and said, I've come to take over your soul, so you're welcome. There's nothing in there. But anyhow, let's get more serious. So then she said, look, I need to get some form of identity. So have you got your, what did you say? First of all, your credit card. Because that's kind of a proof of identity. He said, no, look, I'm a monk. I don't have a credit card. So what about your bank statement? I don't have a bank statement either. What about your home ownership certificate? Don't own a home. Or your rental agreement? I don't rent anything. I live in a cave. How much you have to pay to stay in there? Nothing. There's what else did they ask for?
Driving license.
Driving license, yeah. Can I look at your driving license? No, I don't have a driving license. And then, you know what next they asked for? Marriage certificate, yeah. I'm a monk, we don't get married. And the poor lady was scratching her head, you know, trying to think out, you know, what have you got? I mean, I've got a passport, you know. And actually I had two passports. I still got my British passport and the Australian passport. He said, you're not supposed to accept those. But then she said, you know, before she told me that they're not acceptable, she said, well, actually, Ajahn Brahm, you don't exist. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. The Buddha was right. Sometimes it's really good fun being a monk. And oftentimes you just don't fit in. So even whenever I go through the customs, you know, especially before you board the aircraft, this one guy, he should have known better. He was asking me, in your bag, have you got any liquids or gels? And I said, what do you mean? Any hair gel? I couldn't resist but burst out laughing. I wasn't trying to demean this, but he saw the funny side of it too. He burst out laughing and everyone else behind me burst out laughing. Now get out of here, go through. So there's sometimes with a sense of humour, if it's a real sense of humour, you're not trying to put anybody down, but just what they say doesn't make sense to you. It can be very, very funny. But anyway, eventually she said, I don't exist, I didn't have anything to prove who I am. Because the normal things which you have, you know, you don't possess as a monk. You know who I am. You just ask me to tell a funny story, and then you know, oh, that's such a problem. But nevertheless, I thought it was a wonderful idea of just saying that all the things in this world which tie you to a name and identity, as a monk you start to lose. And as a human being you could start to lose as well. Who are you? If you have an identity, you always need to fulfill that identity. At least that's what you think. If you're supposed to be enlightened, or if you're supposed to be a deep meditator, sometimes you find people always checking you out. You're welcome to check me out. You get either disappointed or inspired. That's what I did with Ajahn Chah. Sometimes people ask me, you know, you're with Ajahn Chah for a long time, do you think he was fully enlightened? You know, he did exhibit psychic powers, things you couldn't explain any other way. But also, the thing which really inspired me more than anything else was again asked to go for the first time to his personal quarters and just have a look, where he slept. I had to bring something down. There was hardly anything in his room at all. There was just a grass mat, a wooden pillow, and a spare robe. And even at this time, even the Queen of Thailand would come up there and say, anything you need. He was supported by so many very, very wealthy people. But in his place, he didn't have anything. That was really inspiring. Not by what you say, but how you live. So those were the sorts of things which inspired me. But it also made it so clear to me, that experience when I thought I was enlightened and I certainly wasn't, how easy it is to deceive yourself. And that's one of the problems in our current world, especially in the West, where Theravada Buddhism is getting more and more popular. And with it, many lay people are claiming to be enlightened. And they get really angry at somebody if you tell them they're not. So this is one of my friends who happens to be a Mahayana Zen nun from Korea. I always liked what she said to me years and years and years ago. She said, if ever you do get enlightened, I'm talking to you now, don't let somebody know, don't tell them, unless it's a teacher you really trust. Because if you tell somebody else about your attainments, you'll be having to spend the rest of your life proving them. It's amazing just how, when Buddhism, especially meditation, goes to the competitive West, how many people just want to be enlightened so much that they stretch the truth in order to compete. That's so sad. Why is someone enlightened anyway? You're not trying to prove anything, not trying to be better than anybody else. In the time of the Buddha, one of my favorite stories there was of these two monks who came up to see the Buddha. And the first one came up to see the Buddha. Ananda was listening. And the first one said, somebody who is enlightened, said this monk, never thinks they're better than anybody else, never thinks they're worse than anybody else, and never thinks they're the same as anybody else. And the Buddha said, yes, sadhu, 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 correct, well done. And that monk bowed and left. And another monk came and said almost exactly the same to the Buddha. Someone who's fully enlightened never thinks they're better, never thinks they're worse, never thinks they're the same. Sadhu, 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 said the Buddha. And then the Buddha turned to Ananda, his attendant, and said, those two were two newly attained arahats. That's our enlightened beings. Let me know what has happened. Pride has got nothing to do with it. You never think you're better, never think you're worse, never think you're the same. Your sense of self, hierarchies, being better, being worse, being the same, those sorts of things have all disappeared. It's one of the reasons why, you develop similes like the trees in the forest. Which is the best tree in the forest? You can't sort of discern which is the best tree. Every tree in the forest is bent, crooked, twisted, has been damaged. That's what life is. That doesn't make a good tree. There's something else which the tree knows are not better, not worse, not the same as anything else. But what really is that enlightenment? I wrote a book about this, and actually it was some of my stories and talks in Perth, which Ajahn collected together and edited, put into a book. I remember reading that, and actually properly editing it. And I still say to this day that's one of the best books which I've ever produced, The Art of Disappearing. And I remember one of my friends is Venerable Sri Panyawada. He was a chief bhikkhu over in Indonesia, but then somebody else gave him a break for a few days, or for a few weeks, or months, or years. But then he's back now being the chief bhikkhu of Theravada, Indonesia. He's a very beautiful monk. He lives very close to Borobudur. He lives in Wihara Mendut, Mendut. If any of you happen to be in that area and you want to visit him, he's a really inspiring monk. But also, he was a monk who once told me, he just said, I just read your book. That's the best book I've ever read on Buddhism. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And when you get praise like that, from someone you respect so much, you'll never forget that. And I remember he was so kind, always. And I also remember in Vihara Mendut, there's a little chaitya, which is in that area. It's a few kilometers from Borobudur, but nevertheless, that chaitya has this wonderful carving on it. And the carving of it is of that story which I wrote of the talkative tortoise. It's like a Jataka tale or Dhammapada commentary tale. When I first heard it, I thought it's a beautiful tale to teach for ordinary people, especially so their children can hear. If you don't know it, the tale of the talkative tortoise was about a tortoise who lived up in the mountains in a lake. And this tortoise would talk to anybody. His problem was, he was very friendly, but once he started talking, he would never shut up. Just like me sometimes. So talkative tortoise, he had no friends at all. All the other fish in the lake where he lived, as soon as they heard him coming, they would swim away and hide behind the rocks or behind the big ferns, because if they got caught by talkative tortoise, they would keep talking to them almost forever. And even when he went up onto the dry land, the rabbits, they ran away as fast as they could. The birds flew up to the highest trees. They were afraid of talkative tortoise. That's why talkative tortoise was so lonely. No one liked him. But except these two swans who would come up to the lake when it was very cold down in the flatlands. So when it was very hot in the plains, they would go up to the mountains where it was cool. Just like people come up to Fraser's Hill in the old days to get away from the heat in KL. And so the swans would come up, and they were so kind. They would just let talkative tortoise talk to them until all the stars ran out of twinkle. And he would love those swans because they were kind, and he could talk as long as he wanted, and the swans would listen. They were the only real friends he had. So, but eventually it became getting cold up in the mountains, and so the swans said in a couple of days they would have to go back to the lake in the plains because it was too cold up in the mountains. And the tortoise said, oh, that's terrible, I get so cold down here. Sometimes I get so cold I keep clattering inside my shell. You can hear it, it's like a bell being rung all the time. I don't like the cold, it's terrible being cold. I don't know why I have to be cold. I wish I could fly like you. 1 hour later, when we finished just that one little bit of complaint, the swan said, I think we can take you with us if you keep quiet. Really, that's easy. We swans, we tortoises always keep quiet. You know, I'm very quiet. I'm very easy to do that. No problem at all. Please take me with you. I'll be quiet, I promise. I'm always quiet anyway. Don't talk that much. Another hour went past and said, you have to keep that promise and we can take you with us. So talkative tortoise again, thanking them for an hour. Went to sleep that night very happy. The following day, the two swans then chose a stick. One took one end of the stick in their mouth, the other one took the other end of the stick in their mouth, and they told the talkative tortoise to bite one in the middle of the stick and not open its mouth at all. Easy, I can do that, no problem at all. No worries, that's a simple thing to do. That's what I have to do. That's wonderful, thank you so much. And after another hour, with the tortoise biting into the middle of the stick, the two swans flapped their wings. Harder and harder and harder. And you know what happened? Nothing. People who talk so much tend to put on a lot of weight. So the talkative tortoise was a bit too heavy. So they got a lighter stick, still strong but lighter. And with the talkative tortoise biting on into the middle, they flapped their wings harder and harder and harder, and they took off. The two swans started rising into the air. So did the stick. And so did talkative tortoise biting on in the middle. And talkative tortoise was so amazed at what he saw. The lake where he lived, all the trees and the mountains and the hills around him got smaller and smaller and smaller. Just like that first time that you flew in an aircraft, if you had a window seat, you couldn't believe what you were seeing. And that was enough to keep him quiet, which was good. And he was trying to remember all the tales he would tell all of his friends when he got back again. If he was talkative before, he'd be even more talkative now, he had something reasonable to talk about. So he was looking at everything, and eventually they came down over the hills into the plains, and at that point they passed over a school. Just at the time the children came out from the schoolyard, and one of the boys happened to look up in the sky, and what do you think he saw? Yeah, the flying tortoise. He couldn't help himself. To his friend he said, "Hey, look at that stupid tortoise flying." And you know what happened next? The talkative tortoise opened his mouth to say, "Who are you calling stupid?" And once he had his mouth open, the tortoise dropped right down from the sky to the schoolyard and went splat and became hamburger patty. And that was the end of the talkative tortoise. And that's a nice story to tell if you've got some kids who are talkative. Tell them that story. Say, this is what happens if you don't learn how to be quiet. But that story is etched as a carving into this chaitya at Vihara Mendut. I remember just Bante, what's her name? Sri Panyawada actually showing it to me, really laughing. He said, "That's your story you wrote in your book." I said, "Yeah, I can remember. That's the story of the tortoise and the stick and two swans flying." So I always remember him for that, a beautiful monk. But he also, I remember his comments, "Thank you, that's one of the best books," or the best book, he said, of Buddhism and meditation, The Art of Disappearing. So never think or conceive that enlightenment is actually gaining something. It's actually losing things. Losing attachments, losing suffering, losing all those things which make life such a difficult thing to live. You lose things. All those things you're attachment to, they disappear. There's a beautiful sense of freedom. And when you're free like that, of course there's no worry, no fear. You're not afraid of losing something, you've got nothing to lose. Nothing to fear. And even things like the fear of death. Are you afraid of death? If you're wise, you've died many times before. What you should be afraid of is afraid of dying. That's often, sometimes painful. But once you get past that point, where dying is actually now death, or in a light being a paranirvana, nothing to be afraid of at all. It's actually, that's peace, a kind of liberation, a burden being dropped, a task being completed, freedom at last. So the idea of freedom and liberation becomes something which is never a cause for fear, but a cause almost for happiness and peace in life. That's why sometimes, you look at modern culture. I don't watch TV, but nevertheless somebody told me there was a program on TV called The Biggest Loser.
No.
Do you have something like that over in? Who was the biggest loser? The Buddha. He lost everything. All of his defilements, all of his pain, all of his suffering. That's why I always say, be a loser, not a winner. You don't win enlightenment, you lose the suffering. If you can understand about the art of disappearing to be a loser, you understand about the path. You're losing the sense of ownership and the fear of losing whatever you own. Not just external things, but internal things as well. Your mind. If somebody came over and said, Ajahn Brahm, you've lost your mind, please don't help me find it again. Be free. So that's actually what this enlightenment is. First of all, you see it, understand it, that's become an extreme winner. Never again will you have wrong view anymore. You see what enlightenment is. And then the next thing which happens, that view, that understanding, eventually goes into your perceptions and thoughts. You never perceive in the old ways. Perceive in the old ways that something is beautiful, you want to own it. Whatever is beautiful, pretty, attractive in this world, you know decays. You've seen that many times before. Sometimes I like to tell in my monks, here are some pictures of supermodels. 40 years after they had the last photograph in Vogue. This is someone you lusted for before. Now, where's that lust gone? You lusted just for an image, a fantasy, nothing really real. I used to notice that on alms round in Thailand, because you knew which young girl serving alms food was married and which wasn't. The ones which weren't married wore all the beautiful clothes, the new clothes, fashionable clothes. And then he went to bless their marriage ceremony in the village one evening, and the next day they were wearing the old clothes, and their younger sister was wearing the new ones. And I was thinking, those poor husbands, they should know and see that, what's happening. The same with the guys. Sometimes you ask people, what type of person would you like to have a relationship with? Whatever that is which you like doesn't last. That's one of the reasons why I've given many talks to young people over in countries like Malaysia. And I said, guys, if you want to find a partner in life, never marry a beautiful girl. If she's beautiful and attractive, you'll always be worried that if anybody else looks at her, then what's she doing when you're off on a retreat in Wisdom Park? Marry an ugly one. Marry an ugly girl and she's yours for life. And ladies, never marry a handsome, strong man. And rich. If he's rich, handsome and strong, then you'll get jealous. Other people will find out, other women will find out, and they'll go after him. If you marry a poor, weak guy with no job, then he's yours for life. You've got nothing to worry about. That's my advice. People don't like that advice, but it's good. So after a while, you look at life in a totally different way. And that's what I like being a monk. You don't have to think like everybody else. You can be a bit rebellious and see things differently. Is that okay for you? Any complaints? Really, you're being honest. So I tried my best giving these talks. I hope they're okay. There is the opportunity for questions this evening and also the interviews right away. I hope you enjoyed that. Sadhu.